The Return of the Phoenix Feather. Chapter 1, 16 Years Under the Fence. The cold autumn breeze blows in your face, and the streets of the capital are gradually covered with golden leaves. In the garden of the Jin Palace, the prosperity of spring has passed, and the wilting petals are quietly falling in the silence. In this garden, there is a figure who always leans alone, unsociable and silent. That is the third lady of the Jin Palace, Yun Ruonan. 16 years have passed like a white horse, and Yun Ruonan's name has long been ridiculed as the third lady of the general's mansion, ugly and timid. In these 16 years, she has never had any dignity. Since she was a child, she was thrown into the Jin Palace, became an orphan under the fence, and endured the cold eyes and ridicule of everyone in this mansion. Although she was born beautiful, she was always ignored because of her lackluster appearance. Although she is intelligent and shrewd, she is despised for her timidity and cowardice. For 16 years, Yun Ruonan's world has been like a lonely boat in the deep sea, lonely, helpless, and no one cares. In the garden of the Jin Palace, she often stayed quietly, watching the flowers on the branches bloom and fall, and her heart was full of wordless loneliness. Today, she is still alone, unaccompanied. "Third Miss, do you want to come and see the flowers bloom?" a maid asked cautiously. Yun Ruonan came back to her senses and looked up, only to see that the maid had a trace of fear in her eyes, as if she was afraid that she would get angry. Yun Ruonan smiled slightly, nodded reluctantly, and said softly, "No need, go get busy." The maid was a little surprised. She thought that Yun Ruonan would show her displeasure as usual, but she didn't expect her to be so calm, but she was a little unaccustomed. She lowered her head and hurried away. The garden was silent again, and only the wind whispered on the treetops the passage of time. Yun Ruonan's gaze turned to the vanishing flower again, and she couldn't help but think in her heart, if you can have true freedom, if you can have your own piece of the world, how good it would be. It won't be long before that wish becomes a reality. Chapter 2, The Turmoil of the Flower Viewing Banquet. On that day, the Jin Palace's mansion ushered in the annual flower viewing banquet. The magnates of the capital came one after another, praising the beautiful flowers in the sea of flowers, but Yun Ruonan still stood aside, watching coldly. But in the middle of the banquet, the unexpected happened. "Yun Ruonan, why are you here?" A mocking female voice came from behind her. Yun Ruonan turned her head, and saw that it was the second lady of the Jin Palace, Yun Ruoxi. Yun Ruoxi was wearing a brocade dress, with a beautiful face and graceful demeanor, and her perfect appearance made everyone look at her with appreciation. And Yun Ruonan was wearing simple clothes, with a touch of sadness on her face. Compared to her, it was like a world of difference. "Second Miss, I'm here to enjoy the flowers." Yun Ruonan replied in a low voice, her eyes widening, and she felt a little uneasy in her heart. Yun Ruoxi snorted coldly, turned around and whispered to the girlfriends next to him, and then said loudly, "How do I remember that you are just a concubine of the Jin Palace, and the qualifications to come here are probably only by order, right?" When the guests at the banquet heard this, their eyes unconsciously turned to Yun Ruonan. Yun Ruoxi's tone was extremely harsh, as if she wanted to humiliate her. The surrounding gazes also began to become subtle. Yun Ruonan was still silent, although she was a little angry in her heart. She was used to such treatment, and she was used to being patient under these gazes. At this moment, a familiar figure appeared at the door of the banquet. The man was dressed in a luxurious robe, and his handsome face was meticulous. It is the current king of Jin, Yun Ruoxi's father, and Yun Ruonan's nominal father. "Yun Ruonan!" King Jin exclaimed coldly, his brows furrowed slightly, "Why are you here?" Yun Ruonan was shocked, lowered his head, and didn't dare to look directly at his father's gaze. She knew that she had never been valued by King Jin, and on such an occasion, although he had never said it explicitly, he had already had something in his heart. "Father, I just want to come and enjoy the flowers." Yun Ruonan replied, her tone still calm. "Flower viewing." When King Jin heard this, his brows tightened. "The flower viewing banquet in King Jin's mansion is for people with status. You are just a concubine of the general's mansion, how can you come casually?" When everyone heard this, they all bowed their heads and looked at each other. Yun Ruonan's face turned pale instantly. She was used to such humiliation. She whispered, "Yes, I see." However, just when everyone thought that the banquet would end in such a scene, a man in a brocade robe walked over from the crowd, his eyes like torches, and swept the crowd lightly. This person is the famous prince of the home mansion in the capital, Lu Gukan. Chapter 3, Divorce Letter, A Twist of Fate. Soon after, Yun Ruonan received an unexpected letter. The letter reads, "The divorce letter has been issued, the marriage contract has been dissolved, all the bride price will be returned, please leave the general's mansion as soon as possible." This divorce letter was like a hammer, completely crushing the hope that had long been shattered in her heart. Instead of crying or complaining, she calmly put the letter away. She knew it was all foreshadowed. However, on the day she was about to leave the general's mansion, Lu Gukan appeared in front of her again. Are you really going to give up like that? Lu Guqin's eyes flashed with incomprehension and confusion. Yun Ruanan smiled lightly and raised her head, with a hint of firmness in her eyes. I haven't given up, it's just that I no longer succumb to fate. Chapter 4, A Game of Chess, Start Again. Yun Ruanan put away the divorce letter, turned around and walked towards the door, with an inexplicable calm in her chest. The humiliation of the past 16 years, this letter of divorce, no matter what, is a cage set for her by fate. And she finally understood that true freedom does not come from the permission of others, but from the power that she has regained control. She is not without support, and although she comes from a humble background, she has a wisdom and hidden talent that no one knows. It was on this day that fate began to open a new chapter for her. Miss Yun, this is your restaurant business contract. A messenger appeared before her, holding a deed in his hand. Yun Ruanan looked at him in astonishment, and was suddenly a little puzzled, so he took the contract and read it carefully. It is clearly written that she already has the right to operate more than a dozen restaurants, and even includes several tea houses and small shops. These business networks are all things that she has been thinking about and silently preparing for a long time. Over the years, she is not really completely incompetent, but has secretly accumulated business methods, which were actually quietly established outside when she was a concubine in the Jin Palace. She has long known that if she wants to change her fate, she must break all shackles with wealth and strength. What's going on? Yun Ruanan was puzzled in her heart, but she didn't ask more. At this moment, she knew that the beginning of fate had just begun. A few days later, her business network was officially launched, and restaurants sprung up like mushrooms after a rain, and in just a few days, it has occupied a place in the major commercial streets of Beijing. Yun Ruanan's business talent, as well as her innate calmness and wisdom, made her rise rapidly in the business world. Countless businessmen and guests were amazed by her vision and decision-making, and they cast admiring glances at her. At this time, the Jin Palace, still in a state of astonishment and doubt. Yun Ruanan is no longer the concubine who can be easily suppressed, her name is gradually spreading in the capital, and everyone is discussing how this ugly and timid third lady rose overnight. However, what really caused the turmoil was the dissolution of the marriage contract and the reappearance of Lu Guqin. Chapter 5, Lu Guqin's Knot. Lu Guqin is the eldest son of the Home Mansion, young and handsome and talented. His family has a deep background and countless supporters in the capital, and he himself is the focus of the capital's high society. However, in the face of Yun Ruanan's accident, Lu Guqin's mood became extremely complicated. Although he did not have deep feelings for his former fiancée, he could not erase a trace of guilt from his heart. His marriage contract with her was originally a marriage between families, but he never expected that Yun Ruanan would always be silent when he was by his side, giving people a feeling of not eating the fireworks of the world. At that time, he didn't pay much attention to her, just as a side project in the family's interests. However, with the rise of Yun Ruanan, this past marriage contract and her sudden change made Lu Guqin unable to ignore it. He felt an invisible force, as if she had become stronger than anyone else, and this strength came from her no longer relying on the support of others. Ruanan, do you really want to just let go? Lu Guqin quietly came to Yun Ruanan's restaurant late at night. He stood at the door of the restaurant, watching the lights inside and the business booming, but he was extremely conflicted in his heart. Yun Ruanan stood on the second floor of the restaurant, overlooking the crowd and scene below, without too much expression on his face. Hearing his words, she smiled lightly and slowly walked to the window. Her gaze swept over Lu Guqin indifferently. Gu Chen, this is my own path, and I don't need anyone's charity or sympathy. Her tone was cold, but with a firmness that could not be ignored. When Lu Guqin heard this, he couldn't help but feel a shock in his heart. He suddenly understood that this former fiancée was no longer the well-behaved and obedient concubine she was back then. She had already become stronger and calmer. Ruanan, can you not remember the mistake I made? Lu Guqin's voice was slightly remorseful and self-reproachful, and his eyes were full of sincerity. Yun Ruanan looked at him with an inexplicable smile in his eyes. I don't remember, I won't remember. Because my life is no longer up to you. Chapter 6, A Desperate Counterattack. With the passage of time, Yun Ruanan's career gradually flourished. The business forces in the capital are paying more and more attention to her, and she has not stopped there. She began to enter the major trades, and even gradually expanded to overseas markets, gradually expanding her influence and becoming the business queen of the capital. At this time, the marriage between the general's mansion and the home mansion was gradually resolved. The divorce letter full of ridicule failed to break her life after all, but became the starting point of her counterattack. Lu Guqin finally understood that this woman, who was once not favored, actually had unlimited potential. And Yun Ruanan's smile is no longer the helplessness of the beginning, but the challenge and victory of fate. Yun Ruanan stood on the top floor of her newly built commercial building, looking at this bustling capital. She had an unprecedented power in her heart. She didn't look at Lu Guqin, but she could feel his presence standing behind her. Gu Chen, This capital city is already my stage. She said softly. This is her life, and it has finally reached her highlight moment. Finale, Phoenix Feather returns, crowned proudly. From this moment on, Yun Ruanan's name is no longer synonymous with humility in the capital, but a symbol of rise and counterattack. Her phoenix feathers finally spread their wings and flew high, and the crown was self-satisfied. Is no longer the hidden concubine, she has become a businesswoman who cannot be ignored in the capital, and even has the courage and wisdom beyond men. All the people who once despised her can no longer challenge her status. Yun Ruanan has written her own legend with her wisdom and persistence. This counterattack that belongs to her finally ushered in a real victory.